Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
Gabby, in the interest of throwing you off your game a little bit, I'm going to start with a big, broad question. Didn't write it on our show notes, so you didn't know what it was. Here's my question, to be revealed in this small booklet.
Oh my gosh, so secretive.
How do you feel about how we cover local news?
Oh, I think this will be no surprise to you, but maybe to our viewers. Chris knows how I feel because we often have some healthy dialogue about what I think should be covered and what you think should be covered. But yeah, I think that we do the best we can with our resources, which oftentimes means there are news deserts in our state, places where we are not fully covering things that should be covered. And we rely a lot, I think more so now than maybe even when you and I started at this station, we rely on people in local communities where we maybe don't have bureau reporters anymore to tell us what is going on in their community.
Yeah. Well, I asked that question because today's conversation, I think, will really dig into that a little bit. Foundationally, the news has always been about figuring out what is going on, especially around us in our local communities. But these days, our communities, they are really bigger than ever. You know, we here at News 13, we end up doing a lot of stories about our state, our region, our nation, as well as, you know, a lot of stories about Albuquerque and the other varying communities. But, you know, those stories as well, we're exposed to so many more of them than we ever really have been before. And despite all of our coverage, sometimes we certainly can see, and I think both agree, that there are gaps in what is going on, maybe even right in our neighborhood.
Yeah, I think the podcast is a healthy example of where you and I have tried to fill in some of those gaps, but certainly there are more. And there's also a big push from some of our local communities to fill that gap with neighborhood news coverage. And we're talking to one of those people behind the movements in Albuquerque today. Let's introduce our guest. This is Lindsay Wood, the founder and publisher behind the Nob Hill News. Lindsay, thanks for joining us.
You know, I am a longtime listener, a big fan, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, let's pose a similar question that Chris just asked me. How do you think we're doing, I guess, as a community in covering news in New Mexico?
Well, first of all, don't sell yourself short. I think that you guys do a great job. I really enjoy, especially your podcast dives in deep into a lot of topics. But you know, you're working at a different level. So you're working citywide. And so we're trying to introduce something to fill in those gaps that you're talking about, which is at a neighborhood level. And you know, I'm kind of here to spread the gospel about the power of neighborhood news. And yeah, I think that it's hopefully starting to catch on.
Yeah. Well, let's just learn, you know, before we kind of get into the Nob Hill News, as we mentioned here, tell us just a little bit about yourself, Lindsay. Where are you from? What's your career background? Is it journalism? Have you always been interested in local news? What about you?
So I'm a very unlikely person to be sitting here telling you about the power of neighborhood news. So I did grow up in Albuquerque. I graduated from Sandia High School. I went to Arizona State, studied biology there. I came back, I actually have a 9-to-5, which is as a project manager at a clinical laboratory. I have an MBA I recently graduated from UNM with an MBA.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But no, journalism was never on my radar. And I know you interview a lot of people who say, oh, I always wanted to do X, Y, Z. Never occurred to me to be in the media at all. So what happened really was chance. I just so happened to marry a journalist. And we were together for over a decade. We are now amicably separated. But he and I, back in 2019, started something called Downtown Albuquerque News. And I know you both know him, Peter Rice.
Yeah.
And so we started that together, and it's still a thriving, going concern downtown. And I edited for 4.5 years for Downtown Albuquerque News. And I loved it. I loved the stories we were covering. I loved seeing people better connect to their neighborhood. I loved people's responses. People loved as you know, they still do love Downtown Albuquerque News. Yeah. So now I live more in the Nob Hill area. And so I thought, this is another area of town which would be perfect for a downtown Albuquerque news. So that's my background. That's kind of the origin story there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you always a news consumer, even, not being in journalism?
I was always a very, let's say, amateurish news consumer. I really didn't understand the differences in quality of news until Peter introduced me to how different news is produced. And, it was all kind of the same to me. Until he was kind of sharing with me his background and his thoughts on it. And so that's really how I became more of drilling down into what matters.
Yeah. And so obviously the name of your publication is telling. It is the Nob Hill News. So it's very hyper local. Sure. But what is it exactly? How did you start it? And how did it come about, like, into a real thing this year?
Mm-hmm. So the background with downtown Albuquerque news, I'll start there, is Peter had always said that he cut his teeth in small town journalism. And so he worked in these small town papers, and there's kind of this magic to a small town paper because they cover such a small area. It's like their own little world. There's like a certain charm to it. They can get into certain details that a big metro daily just can't. So the idea was you bring that model of a small town paper and you break up a big city, and that way you can have little small towns within the city. So that was kind of the foundation of that. It's something I've now been calling the small town theory of journalism. And so essentially, I want to bring that to Nob Hill. We launched it 6 months ago. Nob Hill's the geographic center, but it does have boundaries that are way outside Nob Hill. So it's pretty much a square that picks up like the university area, Ridgecrest, Highland, North Campus. So it's online, comes out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And the idea is to make kind of a small town paper for that community.
Yeah. So I have to admit, part of the opening question I threw at, Gabby and you as well, was inspired from this line from your website here. You wrote, in the Nob Hill News is About section, quote, "Do you find yourself marching to your chagrin in step with the frenetic drumbeat of national news? It can feel exhausting. Maybe it's time to slow down and check out what's happening right next door for a change." So I wanted to ask, how did you come to that feeling about news and how that sort of affected the mission of the publication?
Gosh, that's a good line I wrote there.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy to feel a little bit overwhelmed by everything that's going on. And I think there is a desire for people to want to connect closer with their community, maybe get offline a little bit and go to events and be more connected to their communities. And say your question again, because
I think you sort of answered it there. It feels like the publication was sort of inspired by the idea of like there's just so much going on out there that we're kind of losing touch with just the people who we see every day, the street we drive down every day, the thing that is in our neighborhood. And did you feel like that at all, sort of in Nob Hill?
Oh yeah, and you can. When you have such a small coverage zone, you get to write about this nitty-gritty stuff that the Journal or KRQE would never want to pick up because it wouldn't appeal to the larger audience. But it's like, why are the lights out at this park? And the people who live there really care. There is a fun part about being so small.
Yeah, because ultimately, I think in your neighborhoods, there are those issues that everybody starts asking each other, like, what's going on? And then there maybe is one.
The rumor mill.
Yeah, the rumor mill. And then there's usually one person who's probably got a good idea, and everybody ends up checking in with them. So often they become our neighborhood association presidents.
That's right.
Or homeowner association presidents. But yeah, I understand that.
That's right.
And speaking to that sort of idea of like the national news can feel exhausting, right? I think about like around when you said that you and Peter started, the downtown Albuquerque News. It was like, 2020 was a time when a lot of us were consuming that sort of global news that felt exhausting, right? Things were changing constantly, and a lot of us were stuck at home. like doing those neighborhood walks. I remember like being outside in my neighborhood actually a lot in 2020 and like actually seeing some of my neighbors' faces, but like, you know, keeping distance. Was there like a specific point where you felt like this is really like, this is an important mission to deliver sort of community news?
That's interesting that you're tying it with the pandemic, because when that happened, Peter thought, was this really bad timing? But actually it turned out to be good timing, because you're right, people were very tired by the international and the national news rather. Was there a point? I think the point was right when we began, when the feedback we were getting from people was so positive. Yeah, I think it was just that positive feedback right away. We knew it might take a while to grow, but that it was going to grow. Yeah.
Let's talk about the feedback you've been getting since starting Nob Hill News in April, covering neighborhood happenings there. It's a paid subscription, hyper-local newsletter. What's it been like in terms of response from the community? Have people been signing up? And remind us how often you guys are putting out news stories. Like, do you have a staff? Do you have an editor? How is this working?
Yes, so I have an awesome team. We're putting out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Goes into readers' emails. We've got some freelance reporters who have a lot of experience in journalism in Albuquerque. I've got an editor, and so I really rely on them very heavily to do the heavy lifting and to write the main stories. I'm kind of the assignment manager, where I go to a lot of the meetings and find out what's happening, and I kind of dole it out to the different reporters, but they're the ones that really do the heavy lifting for me, which has been fantastic, and I'm just so happy with the team that we have.
Okay. And so you're publishing again to a rather niche audience in Nob Hill. You obviously believe that journalism on a neighborhood level is important. Why is it also important to you that it be reader funded?
So it's important to us that it's reader funded for 3 reasons. The first one is we want to answer to our readers and only to our readers. We don't want to have to wonder, is this going to cause an issue with an advertiser? Is an advertiser going to want to advertise against this story? So we just want to answer to our readers. Second of all is the user experience. I think we've all had that experience where we're trying to read a news story and things are popping up in front of us, or we're getting distracted by ads in the middle of the story. And so it's for the user experience as well. And then lastly is we kind of want to prove this model that journalism can survive as reader funded. I think that, the ad money just isn't there anymore, and we're going to have to find a new way to do it. But I think that this can be a model for how to do it. And the reason is because back in the day, when you had newspapers where they had to buy big rolls of paper, they had to have printing presses, they had to have people driving around the neighborhood at 3 a.m, throwing papers out at the door. That was a very expensive proposition, and it made a lot of sense to have that subsidized. But now it is very cheap to distribute news. All I do is push a button and it goes to all the readers, right? So yes, we've lost a lot of ad dollars, but we've also made it much cheaper to disseminate news. And so I think that we can balance the books here if people learn that by subscribing, Nob Hill News is around $100 a month, a year rather. It doesn't take that much money for a community to support a local, to have more journalists in their neighborhood. If they can support a barista, if they can have a laundromat, if they can have these other businesses, there's no reason that they can't have journalists in their neighborhood.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. The state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on krqe.com or our YouTube channel.
So you feel like this model is a sustainable one that can pay the bills. Is it working out for you in the Nob Hill News right now? I know it's relatively new here, so it's sort of you're within your first year, but is it sustainable?
We're in the growth stage for sure, but we think it is. As long as we keep growing at this rate or better, hopefully, yes. The answer is yes, definitely. And Peter has proven that downtown as well. He is sustainable there. So
yeah, that's really neat.
And $100 a year, you said. So like the monthly, what's the
about
monthly?
$10 a month.
$10 a month.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the neighborhood and what you are covering. This is Nob Hill again. I think generally we see Nob Hill as one of the most dense Albuquerque neighborhoods. It's dense with homes and businesses. Those homes are, all in the neighborhoods essentially off of those main drags central between Girard and Washington. I know there's some who disagree about where the eastern edge of Nob Hill is. Some have kicked it out a little bit further than Washington or than Carlisle. Maybe
The hot topic there.
Yeah, that is a hot topic.
Don't get Chris started on the cardinal directions here.
But it's also a dense neighborhood with a lot of the older homes in Albuquerque. What makes Nob Hill so unique in your view?
Well, Nob Hill makes Nob Hill so unique, really. I mean, it already is its own unique space and it has that sense of community. Of course, we're lumping in other neighborhoods too, just to have enough people to support the publication that we cover. But I think everybody thinks of Nob Hill as a place to go and enjoy a good meal and to be in a nice neighborhood and to see the cool, fashionable people. And it just already has its own vibe. And so we're just kind of capitalizing on the fact that it already has a sense of community to write and report about this sense of community.
You mentioned you're sort of the assignment manager for your local publication. I'm curious about the way and the approach that you take towards picking and choosing what goes into your coverage. What makes a neighborhood story worth reporting?
A little haphazardly, I hate to admit, but we try to make it kind of a potpourri of different stories so that you every day it's something different and surprising, but we also try to keep it very narrowly focused in the neighborhood. So one of the reporters calls it observational journalism, meaning that our readers have often already seen that empty lot and wondered what was going to go into it, or seen that business was opening and wondering what's coming in. And so it's just fun to be able to open your email in the morning and say, oh, that's what it was. So we just try to give a variety for readers, yeah.
Yeah, I think to that point, one of those stories that I'll bring up that seems to be a continued tentpole of questions in the area is what happens to the Walmart there on San Mateo, the former Walmart that closed down. It's been closed now for a couple years, if I'm correct. You had a story in there breaking the news that Nicole Rogers, city councilor, was asking the feds to potentially help fund the potential purchase of that property. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what was some of maybe the feedback you got from that story? It feels like that is one of those areas in the community where there are just a lot of continued questions about what happens next.
That was a cool story for us because it did get picked up by some other outlets, and
KRQE included as well. So yes, thank you.
We're like, we need to report on that also.
Yeah.
Damon Scott, who did the reporting on that, he's so good. He knows so much, and he can find out these juicy stories. And the feedback. You mean specifically about what's happening in that neighborhood?
Is that a feeling in the neighborhood that is still like a really big question on the minds of many in that area?
Yeah, and they just got that Zia supermarket over there in that area, which is good because there's kind of a food desert. But I think it's people are concerned definitely about how long that might sit vacant. Yeah.
It's such a big property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To the potpourri effect, that's obviously a big concern for folks. There's another story that I bring up that is just one of those that is certainly, I think, off the radar of local news coverage in general from some of the bigger outlets, but a great neighborhood story. This was Maggie Grimison, who wrote about the USPS mail carrier Kat Winsky, who retired from her role after 30 years in the McDuffie and Twin Park areas. I really liked reading that story just because, to me, it represented exactly that, what a neighborhood newsletter is there, is to fill in the gaps in the information for somebody who hundreds, maybe thousands of people knew over the years that otherwise was not going to be covered by the local media. I mean, let's face it, it's not often that we're doing stories about retirements of longtime community figures, but this is somebody who obviously meant a lot to the neighborhood, who, again, many people knew. But I guess I wanted to ask, why do that story?
Those are my favorite stories. They really are, because those are the stories, like you said, are not going to get told for a citywide audience, but for a local neighborhood, so important. They love that. They love Kat. She was amazing. She made such an impact on so many people's lives. She told stories about carrying the mail for people who were, for having their first babies, and now those babies are all grown up and seeing that process. So she was a really integral part of people's lives. And I think it's fun to be able to put that in writing, put that out there for the community, have her feel like she's important, because she is. And those are my favorite kind of stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And coverage-wise, what do you see as some of Nob Hill's big points of pride or strengths? And then to the contrary, what are some of the challenges of the neighborhood that you and your staff find interesting in reporting?
Great question. I mean, the challenges, I think, what's interesting right now in the Nob Hill area is the conversation that they're having around what kind of density, how to incorporate new people into the neighborhood without losing that old neighborhood charm. And so there's a lot of conversation about that. But, Nob Hill is such a strong neighborhood. They're very community engaged. They're very active. They email me all the time with things that are going on, and they're just so knowledgeable about their community that's really just an incredible strength that they have. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned this in the beginning, but Chris and I obviously work for a pretty big news company, and I think we can both admit that there are news deserts in New Mexico. I used to be the Roswell Bureau reporter, for example, and now our station doesn't have that position anymore. We still cover news in Southeast New Mexico, but we do rely heavily on people who live there to let us know what's going on in the local communities. So with your publication, serving a very specific part of Albuquerque, again, I think the broad appeal is still there. What do you hope people take away from your publication and the coverage and the stories in it?
That's a great question. And, to your point about missing those bureau chiefs in different areas, I think that this kind of publication can fill in those gaps and can really help to raise certain stories to a different news desk, like a KRQE. And so I hope that people take away that we can bring journalists back into our communities. We really can. And it's actually not that expensive. There's been this huge decline in local journalism. I think some people quote 75% of local journalists are gone since in the last 25 years, which is a big problem for communities. But there's no reason that has to be the last line of the story. I think that there's a way to bring people back, and I hope that we're going to help prove that for the Nob Hill area and hopefully for other neighborhoods in Albuquerque and other cities.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hey guys, Chad Brummett here with New Mexico Frontiers, the KRQE original series that focuses on tech and innovation happening right here in New Mexico. We've got a lot of great stories about various businesses, technology, and of course space exploration. So make sure that you follow us on air at KRQE and Fox New Mexico, as well as our KRQE YouTube channel online. In the meantime, let's get back to the New Mexico News Insiders.
So Albuquerque is certainly becoming rich with these neighborhood coverage newsletters here. Obviously, Nob Hill News. We talked about the Downtown Albuquerque News, which you were part of, and Peter Rice still publishing here today. These hyper-local stories. Since you launched the Nob Hill News, I know there's been a few offshoots from that as well. The North Valley News and also the International District News. I imagine similar reasons behind why you decided to start those, but why pick those neighborhoods as well?
Well, the North Valley was easy for me because I grew up there. And also because I know a reporter who is very connected, Carolyn Carlson, with that neighborhood, and she pretty much was rearing to go. And so this was not something that I wanted to do so soon, but there was an excitement for it. So I thought, okay, well, so it's very small. We're just dipping our toe in the pool right now with 2 issues per month. And then the international district, because I believe of any neighborhood in this community, they are the ones that need quality journalism the most. Just because of the issues that they're having. I think when you bring things to light and you help to make a clearer picture, it's easier to, move forward from there.
Yeah. I would venture to say that, community meetings that are about whether it's, problems, planning for the future, developments, there's a lot of stuff that happens in those meetings that we don't always cover. We try to keep our eyes out for them, and I think there's always opportunities to report that stuff in our local news, but they don't always happen. And I agree. International District, North Valley, Nob Hill all seem like ripe areas where those are happening.
Definitely.
Yeah, and there's plenty more. I was just talking to a group of high schoolers in a media class, and, a lot of young people get their news now from like TikTok and Instagram, and I was, imploring on them to check their sourcing when they are learning about current events and news. And I appreciate what you just said about quality journalism, because I think that is still something we should all keep an eye out for, right? Even when you're talking about you knew a reporter raring to go, you have kind of a staff of people who already had a background in journalism. And I think that's just important to note, because you're not just hiring somebody with no knowledge about how to get a story, how to gather reporting elements to make something like a quality story. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that aspect? How did you learn about that? I'm assuming a lot from Peter, but why is that important to not only, deliver local news, but quality local news?
Well, nobody wants unquality anything, right?
Yeah, but I think journalism is one of the things, it's easy to get non-quality journalism.
And so many,
no idea.
That's the thing is so many people, I'm not going to name drop here, but there are local people who are, turning out these TikToks and Reels that are getting a lot of likes and shares, but they are not concerned with quality or ethics or things like that, right?
Well, as you both know, the problem with losing so many journalists in the community is that people don't brush into journalists very often anymore. And so people kind of lose sight of what journalism is in a very tangible way. People are much less likely to be interviewed by somebody or see a journalist come to their business or interact with journalists in that way. So, yeah, I think we're kind of losing sight on what quality journalism is.
Just certainly... it just creates a place where we're just sharing a lot less of what's going on, and decisions get made in vacuums.
Yes, definitely.
I think ultimately why we all do in part what we do. Is there anything else you'd like to share or add for those out there listening, just hearing about the various news outlets here, Nob Hill, International District, North Valley News here?
I would like to add why I think that journalism on a neighborhood level is so important. And that is that a lot of civics happens at a neighborhood level. So if you take your average Albuquerque citizen resident, it's very unlikely that in a given year they go speak before city council, or it's very unlikely that they pen a letter to the mayor's office. It's much more likely that they end up at a neighborhood association meeting, or that their church is organizing a cleanup for the neighborhood, or a parent-teacher organization. And so that's where a lot of civics happens. And so I think it's important that they know what's going on in their neighborhood, because when you multiply that out across the whole city, policy is affected by these decisions that are happening at these neighborhood levels. And so I think that when people can learn the facts of their neighborhood, they can make better decisions, and that will hopefully result in overall policy changes in the entire city. If
people want to read some of these publications, where do they go? How can they get connected?
They can go to abqnobhillnews.com, and then they will find a link to all three publications. And we would love to have people check that out. Thank you for letting me share that with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, Lindsay Wood, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks again to Lindsay Wood for coming on our show and explaining her mission behind Nob Hill News. I think it's an admirable one, and yeah, if you're interested, go check it out.
Yeah, some great stories in there to be told about the neighborhood and also things that affect a lot of people outside of the neighborhood too. So.
Yeah, I would argue even if you don't live in Nob Hill, a lot of those stories, like the human interest stories and the sort of local politics, does have more broad appeal, I think.
Yeah, it's fun stuff to read in and learn about. So if you have any ideas, let us know. I'm at Chris.McKee at krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart at krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media. Thank you all for listening and watching.